Get started here. Welcome everybody to our first presentation panel of this conference, and it's the title "Selling Debate: Promoting the Debate Programs and Activities from an Administrator's Perspective." We have three former debate alumni who have now served as administrators, and being both inside debate and being administrators, I think gives them a unique insight into how we can better promote and sell what we do to administrators and university audiences. I know that as my career's kind of changing and I'm in more and more admin meetings, that there's a lot of language and sort of inflection points that I hear that I wish I had known when I was a director to emphasize that really stand out. And I know that that language is constantly evolving and changing depending on oftentimes what conference a certain administrator has gone to most recently. But anyway, I think our panel can provide us a lot of good insight. In no particular order on the panel, we have Dr. Alicia Cohen, the chair of the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Media at the University of Minnesota. She was a graduate coach at Southern California, where she earned her PhD, and a graduate coach at Wake Forest, and an undergraduate debater at the University of Louisville. We have Dr. Danielle Leek, who is the Dean of Online Learning at J. Sargent Reynolds Community College. Danielle was an undergraduate debater at Wayne State and the University of Michigan. She coached at places such as Illinois State, Florida State, U of M Dearborn, and I'm probably honestly going to miss a couple. She most recently was our NDT treasurer. And lastly, we have Dr. Richard Pineda, who is the chair of the Department of Communication at the University of Texas, El Paso, and an associate professor within the department. He was previously the chair of the Sam Donaldson Center for Communication Studies. Richard debated for Baylor as an undergraduate and coached at UTEP and Wayne State as a graduate coach. So I thank the three of you for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. And I know when we were talking about sort of how to organize this, that we were going to sort of riff. So I'll turn the floor over to you and let you all decide how you want to proceed.
So the riffing part now suddenly seems like a bad idea, but at the time seemed like a great strategy to set this up. The first thing, I participated in one of the working groups, and so it's interesting to be back amongst debate coaches, and you realize how special a group of people this is and how immediately connective it is. And so there's lots of names and faces of people that I have no idea who they are, but we all speak the same language and we all have the same interest, and we are enjoying a Friday morning when we could be doing a million other things talking about debate. So I think that says a lot. I guess wanted to start with just one observation, which is, we all have, I think, amazing stories. I'm very grateful to Kelly, who started this effort through the AFA to start recording and keeping an active archive of the sort of success stories and the narratives that are coming out of debate. And that's my launching point. And I guess we can talk about some of those other things. But I think one of the most important things that we failed to do is that we traditionally have internalized our success. So amongst the team structure, or even in an organizational structure, we tend to know who the most successful are, and we tend to hold them up as models. But we're really bad about bridging that wall of communication to external stakeholders. And I think from an administrative perspective, that's actually one of the biggest shortfalls, because I think what ends up happening is administrators tend only to get those success stories in a moment of crisis. And it's usually when funding is about to be cut, or it's usually when there's something on the line that a program is facing some challenge, that all of a sudden an enterprising DOF or DOD goes scurrying out to find a dozen stories or all these articles, and then dumps those on an administrator's desk. And that by that point, and once that conversation has started to a certain extent, it may already be too late. And so the first thing that I think is so important is to start to collect those narratives of success and think about who your immediate stakeholders are. And that may be a department chair that's never done debate, or an administrative head that's never done debate, or a dean or a provost. But it's really important to tell those narratives and to think about those narratives in the same way that you think about storylines. So that you want a story of like hyper success. Maybe your program is lucky enough to have that. In the same way that you want somebody who's never debated, who's shown up, and this has become kind of an epiphany for them, as well as thinking about like the different kinds of academic success that you have. And I think that narrative, the structure of collecting those narratives and putting those narratives out there is super important. And it's about doing it consistently. Because again, I think the problem is if you get to the point that it's a crisis and you say, hey, here's the proof that our program works, or here's the proof that debate matters, or here's the proof that this is a worthy investment, you're probably already on the chopping block. And so to a certain extent, it's it might buy you a little bit of time, but it's not likely to be the thing that stops that push. And so in that group that I'm working on, I mean, we're talking about communicating with the public about team success, and so hopefully we'll have some output from there. But that's the thing that I wanted to start on. And there you go.
I'll bounce off that because that's actually a great starting point. So I had actually created a list. At some point, maybe each one of these will be part of the conversation. But on mine, and in no order, one of them was though this idea of how you had said kind of externalizing what you're doing with your team. And I was thinking about this idea of suggesting that everybody, if you're not already, creating sort of a standard report about your team that you produce. I would love to say you would do it more than once a year, but let's be honest, that's more than enough. And it's just like an annual report that you should do about your team. And if you're interested in seeing what one of these looks like, I don't have a great one for the debate team because mine never turned out really good, but I'd be happy to share one with you. You can email me for the Office of Academic Innovation and Distance Education, which is the last place I was at Bunker Hill Community College. And I'll drop my email in the chat. And you should have sort of standard sections that you put into that annual report and make the sections brief and look good. And someone on your team can do that for you, or you can do it in Canva. And make the graphics easy for people to read, because administrators, as you know, don't have lots of time to look at stuff. And that is actually true, because no matter how much time we all thought and do think that we spend doing debate stuff, as the person who is now, in addition to being the Dean of Online Learning, a bunch of other titles that I don't want, there is way less time in this seat than I ever thought there could possibly be. And you have so many more wins than you even realize that you probably do outside of debate that are things that people in the administrative seats care about. So I'm gonna pick number 2 on my list, which is find the college or university strategic plan and look at every single line of it and write the 1NC. Literally write your 1NC in your annual report to tie your debate stuff to that college strategic plan. And here are some examples of things that I thought of. It'll include things like, you probably have all these people on your debate team that speak multiple different languages, and your college and university strategic plan is going to say something about diversity, equity, and inclusion in some way. So one of the lines in our annual report had to do with the fact that the people in our academic innovation office collectively, it's so cool, spoke a total of 13 different languages. And maybe it's that the different cases or arguments that the debate team were debating about represented 25 different countries, or I don't know, something like that. But those kind of numbers and data points are the kinds of things that speak the language of academic administrators. So the different types of arguments that you debated, the different major programs or academic programs that your students are in, the different types of community engaged work that your students are doing, the different types of academic service programs that you, your graduate students, anybody connected to your programs are involved in, even employment opportunities. And I'll let my colleagues who are on the panel think to other things that could go into this annual report. We could brainstorm for half a minute in an email chain, but my point is have a standard report, always have it, and then use a template for it. And then give it to even more people than we started with. So we started with department chair, dean, and provost. We actually gave copies to the people, anybody who did anything for us in any way, shape, or form any place on the campus, and then everybody else in there, anyone, the print shop, the marketing team, the college foundation, the people who were in the call center, the people in academic advising, the people who worked at the front desks who supported us inside of the office, the people who are admin assistants, the budget office, the IT office, the people who supported us, the people who are doing like the admissions work. I mean, we had copies printed, and it was worth a little bit of money in our budget to do that and to have copies. And then we kept copies, and they become part of the record for the people who were part of our office. They should be a part of the record for your team. I talked too long about all of that, but I think that that's a really important and valuable thing that you can do to support external and gaining value from people, and administrators like it a lot.
I'll pick up from that from Danielle. So my experience has been a little different, and actually probably my most engagement with debate post PhD in Southern California was probably when I was at the University of Kentucky for 10 years and helped transition the coaching situation there, and with Dave Arnett, who you guys know is also a long time friend of mine since I was a young one in high school. But Dave and I always talk a lot. We still talk a lot when it comes to Minnesota. We talk a lot about, and I have had much less involvement and know much little about the Minnesota team, just because it's in a different unit than mine. So, we talk a lot about I think about three things. I think about what are the force multipliers to your budget, to your support on campus, and where do you get force multipliers from? And Dave has been extremely creative in getting support from the team. And I know a lot of people on this Zoom are very creative as well. Second is figuring out what are the metrics that matter to your audience, whether it's the provost or your dean and the university strategic plan, or to your alums who care about winning, the NDT or whatever it is, to your, recruitment and admissions office, to others. There are different metrics, and if you need to be able to measure success in some way. And along those lines, what are the points of pride for your program? Even as a director of a school, I have, just off the top of my head, know what makes our school is distinctive compared to other ones. For me, it's about, having the best four-year graduation rate and what we kind of do in that, and there's some other ones so I have about 10 of them that I can say kind of launch in any conversation. It's sort of my short brief that in advance. Think about what makes your program distinctive from other academic programs on campus, and then from others nationally. And then the last thing that I thought about is think about different ways that you are an intense academic experience and what that network for students means for you. And so if I think about all those three things, force multipliers, metrics, and kind of how you're an academic experience, then it gives you kind of a pathway to think about, okay, how can I connect to the offices of undergraduate education on campus, and what are their goals? What about the development office, and what are their goals? The recruitment office, the international center. And, Dave has done some unique work with the China Center that was on the University of Kentucky's campus at one time. Thinking about those metrics, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, if you have a Martin Luther King Center on campus that brings people in for public events. If you're an engaged university and you have an engagement goal as part of your strategic plan, what are the engagement metrics? And then how are you leveraging your time, energy, resources to meet them? And I would say that you can find really innovative support in different places. So you can recruit students to the university who may not be the top debater or might not even be that interested in the debate program, but because you have one, it makes them come to you. And maybe they have outstanding, scores and grades. And so you are a magnet for out-of-state or in-state recruiting, retention, those sorts of metrics. If you're doing that kind of high school engagement or college, community college engagement, whatever it is, to get transfer students, those are things that someone on campus cares about. So I think that thinking about what you're doing in these areas, how you can connect to other areas, and then what are the university's metrics that these offices are responsible for that you can help them reach their goals on, that allows you to both kind of intensify your academic support network on campus and move forward further.
Yeah, I think I think one thing that dovetails with both of those points is recognizing where and how you're going to build an ally base. And so, we're talking about this from the perspective of a coach, potentially a new coach or a new DOF coming in and having to figure out how the program is going to be supportive or who in the administrative chain is going to work. But the one thing that I found more and more, and we were actually having a conversation about this earlier in one of the breakout sessions with the breakout group, there are administrators scattered across campuses that have debate experience in different ways, and oftentimes you may not know that, and it's I think it's worth the due diligence to figure out who those people are for a couple of reasons. One, they will have a particular experience, maybe not the best experience, but they will have a particular experience that's worth tapping into, because they'll at least, again, going back to the metaphor to start with, they'll speak the same language, and so they'll understand some of what you were doing. The only caution I would add to that is that they also have a very valorized experience of what it was like for them. And if it was a bad experience, then that's one extra thing you're going to have to combat. But it's worth considering that they are going to have a particular take. And it's not unlike, this is the thing, right? And this probably happens to every single one of us. Everything becomes about debate, right? I think about this in faculty meetings and non-debate related meetings. I'm like, what's the best argument? And what is it that I'm anticipating down the road? And to a certain extent, what you want to do is you want to think about who the best people to connect with those allies are. So it's helpful if the DOF is the person that's the contact point, but what I've found is super helpful is having the debaters write very simple, short notes to people that are outside of the department. So to the vice president, to Danielle's point, the vice president of business affairs, who at some point has to sign off on all of their additional budgets, every academic semester will get a note from one of the debaters just thanking them for their efforts on making sure that the funds flow. The same thing for the dean of students, and they're not directly connected to the program in most cases, but I think it's that idea of not only building those bonds, but it's also a great teaching tool for the students, right? Because what you're essentially saying is you need to be able to express gratitude in an environment where there's going to be competitive hands out to try to get support, and how do you distinguish yourself? And I think that's significant. And the other thing that I would say that's really important is thinking about if the DOF or DOD is not on the tenure track, or if that's not the way that the system is arranged, I do think it's important to think about how that person will play a role in the institution. And I think a lot of times we tend to stovepipe that. So the debate person is the debate person that does debate things, and that's all they do. But what I find more and more true is that all those skill sets that we're always talking about that debate provides makes that person valuable on campus committees and on different parts of the university. And there's a benefit to trying to plug that person in. If they're tenure track, they have to, obviously, but you got to build, I think, that skill set sometimes for a DOF or a DOD. Mine happens to be a tenure track faculty member in essentially organizational and environmental communication. So he's already on a particular track, but what I've said to him is that he needs to get play early on out of department committees, within reason, partly because he's bringing a skill set. And I think you all know this, right? We present better, we've got better structured arguments, we've got a way of being able to express a particular set of issues, and that person can really be good on those committees. So they're bringing value to external committees from the department or from the college, but then they're also getting themselves out there, and there's a certain level of capital that gets built up, and I think that's important to remember, because one of the things that I think we've all talked about at some point is, you know, these trends and what the university thinks is important. And that's exactly, I mean, to Alicia's point, right? I mean, there's certain metrics that are really significant to the university, and they want to see a trajectory that's sustainable. And I think that's something we sometimes forget about, again, because we've got a crisis and we need to cover something very, very quickly. And we're not sort of thinking about what this is going to look like in 5 years, or it's going to look like after, you know, your current DOF is gone. And that sustainability is really important. And from an administrative perspective, somebody that comes up with that and has an idea of what they want to do is showing that strategic sense. But it's also valuable because, you know, if you've been in enough university meetings, you know, there's plenty of people that are flying by the seat of their pants and don't know what the next step is. I think debate people are already naturally inclined to sort of say, right, it's the one end, the 2A or the rebuttal. And I think that's really significant.
I do think that there are some ways that people have shown, well, I'm just going to share a couple of interesting and creative ways to succeed in getting money quickly, if we're talking straight up about dollars, that work, and things not to do, which I think are things that we don't talk about often enough, that I feel like no one told me, that I wish someone had told me, that get at some of what you're both talking about like knowing the metrics and knowing the language. It should come with a handbook. Let me just say that. So campuses have money in initiatives, and there are initiatives that recur over and over. So Perkins money is a good example. Perkins money is money that colleges and universities have to fund major programs that have to do with like majors related to people going into the workforce. So like if you have an IT program, there is Perkins money from the federal government for people who are in IT programs. And I was able, when I was at Bunker Hill Community College, to start our debate program by tying the debate stuff to the IT part of and it's also for nursing and other things related to workforce related major programs. And we were going to have debate be part of the curriculum in those major programs. And that's how we got the money to start debate. Now, was it like a major giant competitive debate thing? No. And then we had a pandemic, et cetera, but we got $11,000 to start out of our Perkins funds. That's not a bad start for your very first year in debate. And it doesn't pay for somebody's salary, but it was a 15-minute ask in the middle of a grant meeting, because I knew that money was there. And I knew that if I said, we will start it I had to start by going to talk to one faculty member in our IT program and one faculty member in our nursing program. And I said, here's an article about debate in the curriculum. Could we have a debate assignment inside of your class? And they said, sure, why not? Would you be willing to help us write it? And I said, sure, I would. And we will have students do debates. And can we use the rest of the money to go to a debate tournament in Massachusetts? And they said, sure. So that was how we did it. And that's how we got the money. So tying the money to, tying debate to an initiative where you know there's already money is a good way to get the money. Now, here's where I failed, because I didn't know what I was doing. Because you cannot be late for anything when you're making arguments to people who are administrators. Administrators don't care that debate people are really busy and they don't like things to be late. Thing number 2 that you can't do, not take time to listen to the arguments that people are going to make back to you and then come back and answer them. I feel like this is one of the biggest weaknesses. Maybe you all don't have this problem and it's just me, and I'll be fine with that. I'll eat it and I'll leave. But I feel like in debate, one of the things as like an argumentative style that like we're used to when we talk to each other is that we are comfortable with having debate, right? So you say one thing and I say something back and I don't take it personally, and that stylistically is a way that I communicate. Thank you for shaking your head, Rich. I appreciate it. So like, and even with other people who are academics and then administrators, if we all have debate experience, we do that together. But most administrative type people in higher education don't have that. So I can't do that with them. And as I was coming up and trying to make arguments for debate, they would I would make the argument for it, and then they would say, blah, 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 no. And what they want me to do is say, oh, that's yes, that makes a lot of sense. Let me think about that for a while. And then they want me to take that away and go think about it and then come back to them and then say, I've thought about that. And here's why I still think my idea for debate is a good idea. And so this really emphasizes what I want to say, which is if you have a plan for something, you kind of have to have it early, go to them, let them make their counter arguments, go away and maybe pretend like you've thought about the counter arguments and come back to them, because that's what administrative type people seem to need. And so I feel like that was something I had to learn the hard way, because for what it's worth, I had to ask for the Perkins money like three times before I got it. It was the exact same argument over and over, and then I got it. And that was a good thing. And so ask for the money where there's already money. It'll be inside of the grants for things that exist for programs, especially for workforce. I just did the same thing here at Reynolds. I've been here for 5 months, and we just got $25,000 to start our debate team using Perkins money. So same argument for the same kind of thing for the funds. If you're at a community college, you have a lot of money there. We also just got $50,000 out of our Carissa funds, your CARES Act money, to add to the debate team. So we'll have a debate team here. In case you are debating, we're going to come debate you. It's going to be cool.
I can't emphasize. I mean, yes, this idea of being like turning off debater sometimes when engaging in the, I mean, I think that's just phenomenal professional advice, quite frankly, because I think too often there's I think this also, not only is it hard to temper that sometimes, but then your personality will come out in a way that then also creates another set of problems. And again, maybe this is too personalized, but I mean, this sort of question of trying to put that break between the way that administrators talk about some of this, and then also I found, I mean, and this is true too, the conversations that we've had, especially with the dean to the provost, they're weird because they want evidence and they want data, but you can't bomb them with first lines, right? Like you can't dump them with things, because that automatically, my experience, and maybe Alicia and Danielle have a different experience, that almost makes them more suspicious, right? There's this sense of like, why are you bombarding me with all of this? I need it reasonably, easy to take down, but I need to have enough room to kind of ruminate on it. And I found that tends to be kind of an issue, because you want to provide them. I've got all these cards, I've got all these things that I'm trying to put into play, and I think that's super significant. I also think, there's a healthy dose of stagecraft built into a lot of this. And I think in terms of building those relationships across campus or with administrators, when you do events, it's really important to keep that in mind as well, right? I mean, my DOF has this showcase event, which works really, really well, where they do IEs in addition to a debate. But they set up this kind of showcase in a considering different audiences and thinking about who's going to walk away from these events thinking about what they've heard or what they've seen. And he's very strategic about that and sort of figuring out. So it's not just necessarily the best performers. It's about, in some case, something that he thinks is going to resonate with the administrators, or a presentation that's tied to something that they've got a vested interest in. And that's true when they've set up the campus debates as well, which I think are often undersold and probably kind of a hassle to do. But a lot of times when you can open the doors for other students to see that, but especially administrators and folks in other parts of the campus, those events are worth their weight in gold. And they are a little bit challenging because you've got to make a bunch of different adjustments. But again, the sort of performativity of debate, I think, sometimes gets lost. I mean, sure, it happens a lot in the tournament setting and competition, but for some reason, we're just not translating that particularly well to administrators that don't have that experience. But yeah, I mean, I can't agree more with Danielle's point.
Yeah, I put in the chat that more is not better. Administrators, if they're good, like upper administrators, and I hope that you work for really good, smart ones. They're really in tune with the data. Like they know, but they might not know your data, like about your debate team, but they know in general, like what the colleges or campus graduation, those sorts of retention rates, what, you know, the, I don't know, GPAs are, those things like that. So the requests that kind of allow them to fill in the gaps and also kind of see the kind of comparative benefits. You don't have to kind of drill them with all the things that they already know about the campus along with that. And I think I think that debaters like to make rapid decisions and to kind of argue back and forth. And I think this has been like the hardest thing for me to learn over time is, well, not interrupting people, like coming back to people, making the same argument multiple times, all of that. But that I think that's important. The other thing that I was going to add is that I think figuring out the different types of money and initiatives and interests that are available, whether it's recurring or one-time, is definitely something to take advantage of. So one-time money can be useful for doing something special to raise your profile on campus. So there's some great reasons to do that, going after whether it's new DEI money that's one time or a new, you know, partnership with a unit that wants to. I mean, the one thing that debate does really well is it teaches students to engage both sides of an issue and in difficult conversations. And that's something we really have a hard time with, and that colleges in our land of 10,000 perspectives at Minnesota, you know, really strive to do is to, you know, teach students to think critically and take perspective. So you don't even have to have a fancy debate on campus, but you can, you know, have debaters or your coaching staff involved in initiatives that are, you know, that are cultivating that. Every single campus in the country has some sort of initiative going on that where there's probably some one-time money around. And then the second is the recurring kind of sustaining money, whether that's tuition, which means someone needs to be teaching, since that's the currency on most campuses, or if it's, you know, through camps, or if it's through tournaments, or, you know, but you need some sort of recurring revenue stream and a path for that. And one-time money, you know, is different. Carla has a really good point in the chat. I call it the tyranny of equality, or the tyranny of, you know, equity. It's like doing something for one person, you know, how is this not going to be different from others? So giving people room to giving them political cover for those extra one-off contributions, or even recurring money is super important.
I think that's why one of the other things that is so important in this work is making the space to ask other people on campus how they want to be a part of the work that we're doing, and bringing that to the table as part of the ask. So one of the things that I think I had to also learn I'm going to make this part of a twosome. The other thing that I've had to learn the hard way is that I should ask all the people in the chain before I get to the top of the chain, even if I have an avenue to the top of the chain. And Eric just asked an example of political cover. I'll give you a specific example of this. So I'm not going to give the best debate example. I'm going to use a different example because it's really right at it's right now. So on my current campus, so I'm, in addition to being the Dean of Online, I'm also the executive director of our teaching center. And as part of my faculty advisory board voted to make the request of our executive cabinet to ask them to request that vaccines be a requirement of students and faculty prior to making the decision to return to campus. And I was asked to take that position on behalf of the faculty advisory board to the executive council, to like our president and VPs, and that means kind of like all of the student affairs side of the house, the business side of the house, and our academic affairs team. And before going to do, and that was going to we knew what that was going to cost to make that request, and there had already been sort of a financial cost associated with that, and sort of a labor cost associated with that. And so, I mean, I did the work to go to some of those constituencies to see if I could get them on board in advance. So I went and met with the head of our Department of Technology and met with their team. I went and met with our Student Affairs office and met with their team. We met with a number of different teams on our campus beforehand to kind of get their buy-in before we even, before I even went and met and brought it to our executive council. And when I went and met with the executive council and presented them with that proposal, you know, and knew that that was going to trade, the financial cost of making that request was going to trade off with some of the other initiatives that people had proposed for the beginning of the year budget. I mean, that's the kind of work that having that buy-in is one of the things that I think can be effective. I mean, I don't know if that's always covered, but that is one way to know that you've already done the work and have made the ask and have already talked to people so that someone else doesn't have to do that for you. I do need to tell you that we didn't win that request. And that's another thing that you kind of have to deal with in this moment and have to be, figure out what you're going to do next. So we had to go back to the table, and instead of getting the vaccine request, we're taking that money and are now going to try to use it. We're going to use it to come up with incentives, ways to incentivize students and faculty to get vaccinated. So I guess my other thing that I had on my list of stuff to say today that had to do with selling debate was having to figure out how to deal with when you don't get what you want, and how to handle those losses. I think that that's been the other hardest piece of this journey for me, and trying to think of creative ways to come back when you don't win. The long game is long. So
I think that's right. I think I will tell you what I am concerned about, and I do think that this is maybe a little bit more meta, but I do think that this is a consideration that's, especially at the development conference, is worth talking about or thinking about. And it goes back to kind of this point of professionalization. So, and I think to Eric, one of the part of the point that I thought of when you asked the question about what kind of political cover. So if you look at where different forms of debate have been in relationship to the number of debate coaches who made tenure and promotion, made rank of full, started moving their way into dean's positions and provost positions and ultimately president's positions, my guess anecdotally is that that number is dropping. And it's because we're not producing the same rate of PhD faculty that end up in those positions who then move into positions where they can provide you that political cover. And that in the back of my mind has been something that's really alarming over the period of the last 5 to 10 years. And it may be premature, but my sense is that even a lot of the programs that were PhD granting programs are not producing as many tenure track debate coaches who are then going through the entire process of tenure to then move into kind of the establishment of the institution. And that may not be everybody's cup of tea, that may not be the way to proceed, but if we're talking about a long game, I mean, one of the things that is significant is that you can look back and you can look at a generation before where these people were ending up as provosts and presidents. I mean, that's the ultimate political cover when you've got somebody who was a debater, who understands the process, who recognizes the value of what collegiate debate means, and they can plug into that. And I think that that's maybe a little bit different than Danielle's point about not necessarily picking the phone to call that person directly, but recognizing that they are going to have a vested interest. And that's something that I've felt like every time there's a new step for me, I sort of think, how can I protect debate? I mean, say that sort of openly and publicly, but I think to myself, how can I protect debate at the institution? What is it that I can do, whether it's talking it up, or if it's finding resources, or if it's plugging into the other parts of campus to find things. And that's one of the things that I think it may be a worthy conversation, because the other thing is that, and I think about this all the time, there's a tremendous amount of academic value just in the process that we do, or that you all do. I mean, just working with students, right? And there's oodles and oodles of data that could be flexed out of this, whether that's qualitative or it's quantitative. And for some reason, we haven't sort of risen to capture some of that, or not in the way that I think other people have. The College of Education at UTEP is really interested in sort of watching what the debate team as one of the kind of campus initiatives does, and partly because they're thinking about it from, thinking about it as an academic perspective, right? They're a laboratory to study a bunch of different issues and questions. And that to me is interesting, because I think sometimes we lose sight of that. I have been worried about this for a little bit, and Kelly and I have talked about this before as well, right? Which is that there's also this factor of how long it takes before those of you that are directors now get burnt out and don't want to do debate, and then start to feel disconnected from it for other reasons. And that's something else that's maybe a different conversation. But anyway, I think that this is one of the things that's really important to me, is that professionalization factor has to kind of match whatever the institution is pushing for, and that's one of the metrics I think that Alicia's talking about. If there is pressure to perform in certain kinds of ways, I mean, whether it's as an R1, or a high performing research institution, or maybe it's about other metrics, it's super important that if you want the debate team or that funding line to be successful, that you find ways to really like weave that into the justifications and the explanations. And that's important, because I think a lot of times we sort of, again, are only dealing with the crisis in the moment, or not thinking about sustainability.
I'd like to think about that in a couple different ways, and it relates back to selling debate. And that's that, when I think about kind of who I know in academia through my debate network, I don't necessarily I think of just the debate coaches. There's so many people who get tenure, and I think that the rates of tenure among people that were debaters, like of those entering the profession, are pretty good, because they're goal oriented on kind of research. And so I do think that debate is still feeding the professorate in academia broadly, but I do think that the debate coaching line of administration might look a little bit differently. And so I hope that organizationally that's being thought about from the debate community, because I just think it's feeding academia maybe differently. Maybe it's not debate, but maybe it's, professors of political science, philosophy, medicine, other kinds of places over time. So the thing I think that's relevant on this selling debate piece, excuse me, is that that when we were kind of I lost my thought, or I was thinking about this kind of structural issues. I was looking at Robert Grevin's question here, is that I do think there's a huge squeeze on tuition and state appropriation at state-supported universities, and tuition and donor funds. I think every university at this point is sort of almost semi-private. It's just a kind of almost a spectrum, of how reliant you are on private support to do your mission at both private and public universities. Although the public mission that's state supported has some unique structural features, I would say. And yeah, from an administrator's perspective, taking state dollars, if there's not a special state appropriation for debate, which sometimes there are, at some places, or, tuition dollars for that purpose, or even endowment dollars for that purpose, does require a thought on kind of set aside. I would also say, though, that I think that debate needs to continue to think more broadly about being part of these development conversations. A $1 million endowment generates $45,000 a year for a team. And while it seems like a lot to raise $1 million, with crowdfunding sources that universities have, et cetera, bundling donations over a period of time, I just think of how many people in the debate community had nearly free educations because of scholarships, or at least they had piecemeal scholarships that helped them get through. And, maybe they're not at a point of giving back at a high rate, but in terms of kind of the quantity and kind of what your quality of, income potential from a lot of people who have been quite successful. I think that there are some undertapped, alumni resources that people probably aren't thinking about. I also think that from a development perspective and from a private giving perspective, there are all sorts of local philanthropies that really are, close to a debate mission. And so just linking, if you can work with your grants office or even your private philanthropy foundation office that works with foundations and corporate, giving ideas, there might be some opportunities to kind of think about proposal development and how to do that. And so thinking about I do think the return to in-person travel is going to be slow. I don't know what state, at least from state intuition sources of funding right now, post-pandemic. I think it's different if you have, and that's where I think being creative and linking to other places of mission where there might be donated funds. Maybe this may not be true at a community college level, but it might be at a four-year university level. If there's any element of a research mission, undergraduate debate just fits right into that. And often there's lots of donors that give back just for student travel because they think travel for student was such a fundamental life-changing experience, whether it's they had some experience traveling out of state for the first time or, otherwise. So that's where they're when you can fit with funds that can only be used for express purposes, that's extremely helpful. And it's not that those resources are so plentiful, but there's not a lot of people that are just outside of athletics that are just taking students across the country all the time, and so debate's one of those things that do. So if you can figure those sources on campus out, that definitely, I know that, at every university I've been to, there have been sources that have been used for that purpose.
I actually have a theory, Alicia, that if the debate folks are quick on this, that if you can front load your travel in this first semester, you're actually going to be able to get ahead of some of these financial requests. I think if tournaments and tournament directors work very closely together, I think that there's going to be a little bit of reticence for other entities across campus to take students off campus to go to things. And I think in this first semester, I think you may be able to really run the table. Now, that perspective comes from Texas, where we've gone like just entirely, back to normal. But it just strikes me, I mean, I'm thinking about this already, and I've talked to my DOF and have tried to streamline this with funds. I've already talked to everybody else in the program. So my journalism people, my advertising people, they're none of them are gung-ho about traveling. They don't want to even think about going to some of these student-based events, but the DOF says, I've already got these tournaments lined up. I'm already ready to go. I think that there's a good chance that you may be able to front load or at least plan for a pretty rich first semester. And that doesn't guarantee the full year, but I have this feeling that people aren't going to be ready to do it. Whereas I think debate coaches are already ready to do it, right? I mean, I think everybody's ready to make that adjustment. So there's a little bit about opportunism. And just real quickly, I mean, Will Baker had a question about what they're interested in doing. So the conversation that I had, I mean, we have some interesting metrics. So we've got a huge first generation population. We've got obviously a large Mexican American student population. We have, they have some interest in looking at the methodology of debate coaching in terms of education and pedagogy and leadership. And so in those areas, I've had some very, very base exploratory conversations, not even with the DOF yet, but with a couple of colleagues in College of Ed. And so there's opportunities for some of that. I guess my bottom line is that one thing that's true about an administrator and the responsibilities that I have now is I have to quantify every single thing. I mean, it's everything. And to a certain extent, I mean, I don't know that in what a DOF or a DoD has to do that they think about that way, but there are so many data points that come across your desk that are tied to the educational mission of the institution. And I mean, I think back to the point that both Danielle and Alicia have been making from the beginning, which is we don't often track them for whatever reason, right? For whatever reason we don't. But if you think about generational students, first or second generation, and what they're accomplishing, time to degree, the focus of their degree, their possibility of returning to the community. That's a big part of UTEP's mission. We'd love to get the students educated to go out, to come back, to change the community. You have access to all this information, even if it starts anecdotally. But I think the super important part, and this is from a person who's not a quantoid, right, is to make sure that you put those into data points that do have that quantitative value. Because you can't just say, I've got these great stories in the same way that you've got here's proof the debate is awesome from all of these folks that have done it. I mean, you need to be able to point to trend lines and to be able to point to that quantitative data.
Yeah, Richard, I'll second that. I think that I think that debates, people who are interested in sustaining debates need to be attending to creating those metrics more effectively, because that is part of the discourse of higher education that may or may not be reflective of the structural issues that were it was part of a question that was in the chat earlier. I mean, as an administrator who has to look at the math, I am, and somebody who loves debate more than anything, it is very difficult for me to look at the budget at my campus and say, I could commit 100 grand to a debate program if that debate program was being led in a way that only served 6 students. And so that cannot be the vision of the debate program that I would invest that money in, because that is not thinking about how a program can be reflective of supporting a broader community. And that's how I need it to be understood. It doesn't see the broader impact. That's just the way that it needs to be seen. So I can make some suggestions as well for how you might think about that as it relates to upcoming travel. For example, there is a lot of data that talks about the way that all of us, including our students, are experiencing tech fatigue. And being able to get off the computer and move around and interact with people live is something that students could use. So we are about to send students to do a lot more interaction, for better or for worse, using current CARES Act funds. And so that might be a place that you can access money if you're looking to do what Richard is suggesting and get quick. I think that's a really smart thing to say, that people who are quick to act might be, if you can get around restrictions on travel, you may be able to capitalize on the access to funds that your campus has right now available, like many campuses do, and make those arguments. And that for many people, the ability, remember that one of the biggest equity arguments is that people who are being asked to use virtual tools to do learning activities, the assumption that that generates equity doesn't assume that the experience of using digital tools is the same experience for everyone, right? I mean, if I'm doing my experience with you right now, but I'm in a room with 17 other people around me where it's loud, it's not the same learning experience. And so there's a lot of different arguments to be made about why it can be extremely valuable for people to have the opportunity to get off the computer and learn and debate. And so I think that there are arguments to be made that are persuasive about why people need to go away and debate and travel. So I would encourage you, if that's something that you want to be able to say, that you not give up on that argument. And there's money to be had to do that right now.
Yeah, I would definitely be going to research undergrad ed deans, your education abroad, different places on campus to see if there is an unspent travel funds. And I think that you could say that because debate was interrupted during the pandemic and tournaments were canceled, a lot of them were rescheduled for whatever. And, so you want to, see where there's budget for that. I think that's a very smart strategy actually right now. I can say the same thing. I have some set aside funds or donated funds that are just for faculty travel, and that just went unspent this last year. I mean, that donor wants, so now there's 2 years money instead of one for, the next year, which is great because everyone wants to go to Europe when they can, right? But that's, that it can't be spent elsewhere, and some funds have to be spent quickly, like the CARES fund. So I think that's really good advice.
I would say, I guess, sort of one last thing, at least from my perspective, and I mean, I say this a lot to people, like professionally, that the one thing that was super amazing after the people that you get to meet through debate is the idea that debate teaches you how to lose, right? And you figure it out, and you start to make those adjustments. Use each other and use people like us that may still be in it or maybe on the fringes to ask questions and to get guidance, but in particular amongst yourselves, talk about the wins and the losses when it comes to these interactions on campus, because not only will you find that some of these similar questions and pivot points are being used by administrators across the country, you'll also find that some of the things, I mean, this is, I think what Danielle has shared really well, which is this idea of like, you're going to make these mistakes and everybody does them, but oftentimes if you know that might be in the hopper, it's not like figuring out what's going to happen in an actual debate. But so talk about the wins, but also talk about the losses so that you can figure out what you might be missing, or the strategic pieces that are available from fellow DOFs or DODs, or from administrators or people that are in sort of the kind of extended family, because I do think that's something else. I mean, we again, I mean, my experience has been anyway that we tend to sort of internalize especially those losses, whether it comes from funding questions or it comes from issues related to infrastructure. We tend not to talk about those things. And that's usually, like, if there's going to be problems down the line, it's partly because we haven't dealt with that, or you haven't talked about it and you haven't gotten some kind of guidance. And I think it's really important to make sure that you use mentors across the scope of debate, but also that you're talking to people that are having similar kinds of experiences. So don't be afraid to reach out to, I mean, you're looking for apples to apples kinds of comparisons, right? So if there's some similarities that are very valuable, I guess I would say, but take advantage of that and take advantage of asking. I mean, I you can tell I love to talk, so I mean, whatever, ask the kinds of questions that you may be afraid to ask your chair or your dean. I mean, ask us and find people that have that experience, because they can kind of run through those arguments and think through what might be said or what might not be said.
I would
Thank
just,
you all. Go ahead.
Sorry, we're out of time. That's okay.
Well, thank you all. And I think there's a lot to still discuss and consider. And I thank the three of you for taking time out of your day to talk to us. I think you've given a lot for the individuals to think about. And then, we have working groups that I think are thinking about a lot of these sorts of questions as well. So, and then Ed Lee has a presentation this afternoon and evening that I think will build upon this, about where to build strategic alliances. Because the one question that I leave with is the question of, coaches are incredibly busy. So who can they reach out to really assist in finding out where resources are? Who are the right people to talk to? It's really hard to do that 100%